So hopefully everybody had a great Giving Tuesday, and that went well for everyone. So welcome to the December edition of the Cerini Nonprofit Connection. With everybody focused on year-end giving, we figured we'd invite Peter Heller, founder of the Heller Fundraising Group, to talk about how to think beyond the year-end gift to maximize giving. So thank you, Peter. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Ken. It's great to be here and to see you.
So before we get started, why don't you talk a little bit about how you work with the nonprofit sector and what you do?
I will, but I just want to comment on, I somehow have this ability to crack people up with just saying the most basic thing. All I said was great to see you, and you started laughing. So thank you for that. It's my
no problem.
It's my untapped career. So the Heller Fundraising Group is a small consulting company based in New York City with clients up and down the East Coast, and actually much further than that now that the pandemic has given us the ability to work remotely. And we were founded 17 years ago by yours truly. And we're now, we've got 5 employees and about 10 to 12 consulting partners. And we work on capital campaigns and the feasibility study and planning study work that leads up to capital campaigns, as well as building major gift programs for nonprofits to tap into their largest donors. And we also help nonprofits figure out how to ramp up their development offices if they've never had an office, or they need to see whether they're using best practices within their office. And we do a lot of training and coaching on those subjects. And I'll also say, Ken, that the fact that we focus on those specific things really informs my perspective on what we're going to talk about today. And I think that'll become clear as we move forward. We made a decision that, we're not a company that does everything. We don't, as I will say today, I have a lot of opinions on annual funds, but we don't get hired to run your annual fund. Same thing with golf outings or galas or crowdsourcing. So we're in a very specific lane.
Okay, if anybody has questions as we're going through this for Peter, please either post them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that your questions get answered. So right now, with everybody focused on year-end giving, let's kind of start there and dive into that as a topic. How important is giving to nonprofits this time of year? Is this more important now than other times of the year, or what?
Yes and no. So let's deal with the yes first. Okay, so let's step back and think about it. We all know that basically year-end giving is going to come primarily in 2 forms. You're either going to get a check in the mail to your nonprofit, or you're going to get an online gift. And also, I guess, third form would you get securities, or as Ken and I were talking about, somebody might want to transfer some of their appreciated cryptocurrency to you, right? So there's some asset that's going to get transferred to you either electronically or through the mail. And it's not an accident that nonprofits focus on December 31st and like the end of the month of November and December as a time to get gifts. And the big reason is people are focusing on their taxes. Right. So a lot of people are thinking, okay, I'm making most of my giving, or I'm doing most of my giving, or I'm going to make some additional gifts at this time of year. So there's always an uptick. And in fact, there's a statistic I can maybe pull up in a few minutes, but a lot of online giving, very high percentage, happens at the end of the year. So basically, it's a mistake if you're not going to focus on it. However, if you're on this Zoom today and you're like, oh crap, I've never focused on it yet, I'm in trouble, don't panic. We're going to talk about that.
So one of the things that you did mention, you talked about appreciated stock, you talked about cryptocurrency. Now you're kind of diving into my world a little from a tax perspective. I mean, One of the things that you're seeing out there, we've seen, is that there's definitely been an uptick in people who are donating appreciated assets, whether it be stock or cryptocurrency or whatever it is. And organizations really should be thinking about making sure that they've got systems in place to be able to accept those types of donations, whether it be a brokerage account or whatever, so that when somebody comes to them and says, I want to make a donation, they've got that stuff in place. And also thinking about things like contribution policies. What happens once that money comes or those funds come in? Do I liquidate them? Do I hold them? What do I do? So, those are things, just kind of throwing it out there. I know it's kind of a little outside of what you do, but just kind of throwing it out there and saying,
I think it's important. In terms of my background, before I started the company, I worked at Columbia University in New York City for 10 years as a senior member of the fundraising staff. And, we dealt with stock gifts all the time as a means of executing people's gifts, either, large or small. So I would agree with you. I think that even a small nonprofit should spend at least a few minutes figuring out how to get a brokerage account set up, because sooner or later, somebody's going to come to you and want to do that. And it's better that you're prepared rather than like, oh my God, how do I accept this gift? You can very easily Google what are the tax advantages of appreciated stock gifts. So we don't need to go over that now, but it's particularly with the way the market's been doing. There's a lot of people who may want to make a gift of appreciated securities.
Right. I agree. So how have donations changed due to the pandemic? Do you see these changes continuing? What do you see happening with respect to donations?
Yeah. So, well, first, I think I want to start just by saying what almost everybody says when we talk about the pandemic is that, and we've all heard it a million times, but this has been like a really hard time for us all as human beings. Okay. And, some of us have suffered a lot more than others. And it's got a lot of challenges. Those are still ongoing, and a lot of suffering. And at the same time, there have been some silver linings. Like we've learned new things. For instance, who thought we'd be doing most of or a lot of our business on Zoom and it would actually work? Crazy, right? And it's the same thing with giving to a lot of nonprofits. There was a lot of fear in the first 4 or so months of the pandemic about, how are we going to do business? How can we, we were all trying to figure out how to live, let alone make donations. And it turned out that people continue to give to what they care about, whether you're a frontline responder organization or you're the opera. And this is a little bit off topic, but the pandemic has helped me understand that any nonprofit and everybody working at a nonprofit needs to wake up in the morning and believe 100% that the nonprofit is important to the future of humanity. And that may sound really lofty, but I really believe it. Regardless of what you're doing, if you can't draw a line between what I'm doing and this matters to humanity, you're not going to be able to be A, excited about the hard work you're doing, and B, raise as much money as you need to raise. So the pandemic has really crystallized for me that you got to double down on why you're important, and that many organizations actually raised as much or more money than they did before, just to give a simple answer to your question. And looking forward, I think it's incumbent upon those who believe in what I just said to get out there in whatever ways they do fundraising. We can talk about some of those, and continue to get those messages out there, because you'll continue to raise more money.
Well, I think what's happening is that everybody is now moving to similar platforms to get their messaging out there. And some of that messaging is getting lost. And it's going to be very, very, as you said, incumbent on nonprofits to kind of scream at the top of the lungs, this is what we do, this is why we're important, this is why we're relevant. Because if they're not, their messaging is going to get lost.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. And I'll tell you why. It's not just because I like you. It's because we get into habits, right? And it's such and such a online technology was really the big thing, and then it wasn't. And you can look in the same way at the awards gala that nonprofits do. 300 people coming into a room to celebrate something. So many people are put the pandemic aside, so many people were already over that before the pandemic. And yet it can be a really powerful way of raising money. And I think that people, like right now, I got my cell phone here, right? So sometimes texting a potential donor is actually the best thing to do, but because they're not paying attention to email, they're not paying attention to the phone, and texting they pay attention to. But we're going to cycle through all of these different technologies, and nonprofits just have to figure out the next way to get attention. I'd say email is still king in a lot of ways, but that's a whole nother story.
I think it really depends on who your donor is. And part of it is really understanding your donor and how your donor communicates and what messaging your donor wants to hear.
Absolutely. And you're always going to have trouble getting through to everybody. So and I do want to talk in a few minutes. I think we're going to hit this subject, but sort of beyond year-end giving, what's really important in connecting with your donors. But I want to make sure that we answer your questions about year-end giving and cover that as much as needed.
Okay, so let's jump into some of that. I mean, we've got year-end giving, and you explained that it's important because people are kind of focused on donations and giving at this time of year. But I mean, what you said, part of your goal as an organization is to kind of expand that year-end giving or year-end giving to year-long giving. And I guess, you've got that important aspect of, being able to get donors to give more than once to your organization. I think there's a statistic out there that, less than 50% of all donors give to an organization more than once, and it's how do you get those donors to really buy into your organization and continue to donate to them, and I think that's kind of important. Let me throw out a little quick story for you, and then I'll convert it into a question here. Last year, around this time of year, we reached out to 10 different nonprofit organizations. We gave them each $500. I know $500 is not a huge gift, but it's $500.
Pretty nice gift.
Of those 10 organizations, we got, from 6 of them, we got the chain thank you letter, that normal correspondence that comes from somebody within the organization. 3 of the organization, we got a personal thank you from the executive director of the organization. 1 of them we got no response from. And here we are almost a year later, and there's been no communication from those organizations beyond that initial thank you letter. So is that what organizations should be doing, or what should organizations really be doing in order to cultivate their donors?
Well, I think we both know the answer to that, that they should not be ignoring you. Particularly for $500, which is a nice gift. It's a missed opportunity on their behalf, right? So but let's look at it from their point of view for a second. Many, I don't know the profiles of these organizations, but many of nonprofits, and I would imagine some of the people on our conversation today are in this situation, is their offices are overtaxed, right? There's enough time and energy just to keep up with whatever's directly in front of them. So the area of stewardship really falls off, the horizon or the table very quickly. And it's unfortunate and it's a mistake, and it happens a lot, but obviously I can't tell that those nonprofits if you would keep giving, but I would imagine, if you gave to 10 and 3 of them started being really nice to you and demonstrated how important their work was, that you would continue giving to them. And it's because of that sort of thing that statistic you mentioned of, like 50% of donors only give once, is people fall off and nonprofits cycle through donor lists. But the whole, secret to success is you got to build those relationships and build them all the time. Like, what's the point of finding a new donor? Go to the next one. It's like serial monogamy or something.
Now, you said that organizations don't have necessarily the bandwidth to be able to really dive in and do a lot of this research and stuff. How do you determine which donors you want to build a relationship with? Should it be all of them? I mean, how do you kind of go through that whole process of determining which are the best donors to go after and which of the people who maybe made contributions have the wherewithal to make much bigger contributions?
Right. That's really an excellent question. And, the whole kind of inside the development office, do we have time to do X, Y, and Z? I think that's a conversation for another time, kind of setting up your infrastructure. I do just want to say a couple quick things until I get to the sort of the, how to determine donors, is that I would challenge everybody who's listening in on this conversation, who's working inside a development office, to audit their time and to really figure out if you're spending your time doing what's most important to moving fundraising forward, or if you're spending your time at the things that are like right in front of you and are the shiny or challenging candies or whatever. And we all do it. I'm sure, Ken, you've probably done this from time to time. No, like time management is one of the most important things. And I remember a client years ago that this is kind of on that topic, where they got a new development director. This was a dance organization. They got a new development director, and that person's first task, they decided they were going to put together a cookbook. And I'm like, this has nothing to do with fundraising. Okay, that's a really extreme example, but you have to be really rigorous about what you're doing with your year, with your month, your week, and your day. And I would bet that everybody who's working in a development office can peel off at least a few things to do more stewardship or to do more donor outreach.
I mean, I think one of the things that we're finding, especially in the pandemic, and we'll go back to allow you to answer the question, but I think what we're finding a lot in the pandemic is that people have gotten to a point where they're in crisis management mode. And they're really focused, as you said, on what's right in front of their face, putting out fires, dealing with issues and everything else. And they're not really spending the time thinking strategically and planning, which goes back to what you were saying, that, you got to look at how you're spending your time, look at how to be more strategic in your thought process, figuring out what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck.
Absolutely. And that was true before the pandemic, but I think pandemic for, healthcare workers, teachers, and nonprofit people, is so much more is being asked of these people. And, and it's really challenging to keep up and to take care of yourself also.
So getting back to the question,
yeah.
What should nonprofits be doing in order to kind of determine who are the right people to go after?
Yeah. So let's think about this for a couple minutes. There's a number of ways to do it. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into what we do with a nonprofit if we're just starting out, to help them build a major gift program. Okay. And we're going to assume that organization has a group of donors. It could be 100 people. It could be 3,000 people. I'd say that's, for most small size nonprofits, their donor list is somewhere in that range. We want to make sure that they are doing a really robust job of reaching out to those people for their annual gifts. And like we're talking about, year end is a really important time for that. I would just make a shout out for, don't wait till year end to do that. It's like, here we are, December 2nd, put a calendar together for 2022 right now for when you're going to send emails and letters to people for these gifts. Don't just send it at the end of the year. You can do it throughout the year. So that needs to be in place. And then what we would do is we would do a number of really 3 things in conversation with the fundraising leadership at the nonprofit to figure out how to pay more, who and how to pay more attention to people. And when I say fundraising leadership, that can be a development director if there is one. It could simply be the executive director. It could be somebody else. Occasionally it's a volunteer board member. So let's say you have a donor list of 500 names. And when I say names, for right now, we're talking about individual donors. We're going to leave foundations and corporations and government entities, and we're going to leave that alone for this conversation. We're talking about 500 individuals. The 3 things are, we can do an analysis using research tools. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Donor Search. There's others out there. We use Donor Search to look at giving and wealth indicators. we look with the nonprofit at past giving by those people to rate it high to low. And then we like to hear what we call their homegrown stories about what they know about these people. Some people, they're like, I don't know how this person got on. I never heard their name before. Other people, maybe there's 10 to even 50 people that they know really well. So we use this kind of like, you remember the Harry Potter movies when they arrive back at whatever the name of the wizard school is called. When they arrive there, every year there's the sorting hat or whatever, they get sorted into the rooms, into the dorms. It's kind of like that. We want to sort using data, past giving, and homegrown information to figure out, like, who are the people who rise to the top of that list. So am I making sense so far? Because there's a couple other pieces.
Yep.
So let's say, for argument's sake, you got a list of 500, you come up with 50 people. The other piece of the puzzle is, and this comes back to that infrastructure question we were talking about before, unless the organization can carve out some bandwidth to reach out to people in a additional or new way, in addition to that, those maybe emails and letters they're getting, it kind of doesn't matter how many great potential donors at a higher level you come up with, because you need to have, going back to time management, you need to have a rigorous strategy for monthly outreach to donors. And if you, those of you on the call, if you do happen to download the free tools from the Heller Fundraising Group in the chat, one of those tools is something called a Major Gift Toolkit. It's simply just a spreadsheet with some instructions. One of the tabs on there is a chart of how to measure monthly metrics of activity. So to put a fine point on this, if as an organization, you can figure out how to have meetings with just 4 people every month, that's 1 person a week, you can really begin to take your fundraising forward. And so you've got kind of like this this bottom layer, which is a great like base layer of structure of the annual contributions through online and through mail. And you want to build on top of that this layer of a small group of people who are going to be your higher end donors who you can cultivate more personally.
Can we go back to so let's go back to your example. We have 500 donors.
Yep.
You identify 50 of them as the ones that you're going to add to your list of donors that you're going to do more of a personal outreach on. What do you do with the other 450 donors? I mean, what sort of communication should continue to happen with those other 450 donors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you want to continue, again, it's great that we're talking now because we're in December. So we want to think about 2022 as a great example. It's like put together a strategy for outreach to them over the course of the next year. So
what should that, I mean, when you say strategy, I mean, do I reach out to them monthly, twice a month, quarterly?
Yeah.
I mean, what
okay,
should I be
let me give you something.
Sorry. Yeah. I don't mean to be so granular, but
no, it's great because this is like, fundraising is in the details. We want people to leave here with some actual like good information. So first of all, I'm a big believer in a scheduling calendar, right? So you get the 12 months of the year and across the top, and then you want a list of fundraising activities down the side, and like, mail appeals can be one, online appeals can be, so when things are happening. And once you do that, so I no longer believe that you can ask too much. Now, you don't want to be the nonprofit that like every week has another solicitation letter in somebody's mailbox. But, depending on what you do and who you are, you could send a letter 4 times a year. You can maybe send it more. You play with it, see how it works. And there's another thing that, I don't know, Ken, have you ever heard of this group? There's an organization called Direct Marketing Association. It's a huge international organization. I think they actually changed their name recently. These are fascinating people. These are people who think about this stuff like all the time. And a number of years ago, I went to their big like annual conference in New York City, and it's like hundreds of people. As far as I could do, I was like the only capital campaign guy. So there's all these direct, and I learned so much from them. It was fascinating. And one of the things I learned, this is obvious to many people, I just didn't know it. But if you give money to a nonprofit, like a national group, and not those 10 that you gave it to that didn't follow up, but if you give it to, I don't know, Sierra Club or something that's doing, League of Women Voters, or something that's doing, national work on any subject that matters to you. Hopefully what you'll see is you'll get on their email list, because these big national organizations, they have a whole team of people working on their online strategy. Okay. And hopefully you'll see that you're going to get consistent information about the subject matter that they're talking about, right? That doesn't, and they're not going to be asking for money in most of those emails, because they're doing a consistent communication. And then from time to time, and they all do testing, so they each know like what works best for them. Maybe it's once a month. They'll do a call to action about fundraising. Other times it may be, hey, call your senator, or this thing is happening. So the idea is you want to have a schedule of outreach and make sure that you're communicating with people about things that aren't just, hey, give me money.
I mean, you want to try to marry people to your organization. You want people to, you think about any of these reality TV shows that are out there. I mean, part of the reason they tell the backstory of all these people, who are the contestants, is, they want people to kind of fall in love with the backstory, fall in love with the, the potential, so they'll vote for them or whatever. Right. Same thing here. I mean, you need to have the backstory for these organizations. You need to know who they serve. You need to understand impact. You need to understand what they're doing and how they're relevant and how they're making a difference. So I think that backstory is important.
Right. And just to step back for a minute, that depending on people, that happens in a bunch of ways, right? The emails, your website, letters, events, even virtual events, one-on-one conversations. You want to excite people about all that. I thought of a kind of fascinating example from a number of years ago. I'd just like to share it briefly. That kind of, well, there's two examples, and it's it has to do, the reason I'm telling you these things is they bring to light the importance for every organization on focusing some amount of your time on this top tier of potential donors. Okay, so here's the two stories. The first is that a whole bunch of years ago, we worked with Charity Navigator, which is the organization that ranks charities, and we helped them with a feasibility study to get ready for a campaign to raise. They're a nonprofit also, to raise money for themselves. So one of their board members said, well, we're an online organization. We should do what Wikipedia does. And if, everybody's probably seen like once or twice a year, that thing pops up at the top of Wikipedia. Hey, give us $3 or give us some money because we're funded. Have you nod your head? You maybe seen it, maybe not. All right. Yeah. Wikipedia, you ever heard of it?
Yeah, that I heard of, but no.
So Wikipedia does this big fundraising thing. So their board member was like, let's do what Wikipedia does. And my team was like, all right, that's interesting. Let's actually call Wikipedia and find out what they do. So yes, they do this annual drive where it says, we're funded by this and that, please give us some money, click here. Turns out Wikipedia has an office, this was a number of years ago, but like at that time, about 8 people who do nothing but major gift fundraising. So to the outsider, they appear as if they're a crowd-funded thing that just gets $3 here and there from people all around the world. But in fact, they get that, but they get the majority of their money from $1 million plus gifts like that. So big eye opener. The other thing is I just happen to be like sorting all my old papers in my office. And this is a printout of a newspaper article from 2008 from the Los Angeles Times. And it's about Obama's first race, where I believe it was change.org kind of changed the whole way that political fundraising was doing by getting small gifts from lots of people. And that's part of what allowed Obama to win, because he got all of this money from that. But the thing that this article talks about is that, in fact, when they analyzed those gifts, the distribution was the same as you see in all kinds of other fundraising distribution, where 20% of the donors were giving 80% of the money, because yes, they were giving $25, but they gave it again and again and again, right? So you still, right? So people think, oh, like, you know, now there's crowdfunding and we'll just get a little money from everybody. But in fact, anytime you analyze crowdfunding, there's a few people who give a lot and some people who give less. So my message is definitely focus on that base level. You know, those, in our example, those 450 people who are not the top, get a schedule for them, but make sure you spend time to reach out to those other people.
Well, let's talk about our 50. What do we need to do? What should our messaging look like? How do we reach out to them?
Yeah, so we love one-on-one communications. And again, because of the way the world is today, not just the pandemic, because of, you know, it used to be, well, call them at home. Well, many people don't even have a home phone anymore. Or, you know, let's just take writing them a postal letter off the table. Don't do that. It's like, that's a last resort. So what's left, right? If I'm sitting in my place of business and they're at home or their office, I got to communicate with them somehow. I can call their cell phone. I could call their office phone. If they have a home phone, I could call that. I can send them an email. I could send them a text message. You have to figure out what you're going to do. So these days, most of the time we suggest you start with an email. You have an email address. And there's a whole strategy we use for, you know, what to say in an email. And basically, you want to just say enough to get them to reply to your email. You don't want to tell your whole story of whatever, you know, it's like, hi, I'm the executive director of X organization. I want to thank you for the great gift of $500 you just made. We're doing really important work for this community, for the future of the community. I'd love to spend a few minutes hearing why you made this gift and telling you about our vision for the future. You know, something just simple that hopefully will get a reply. We spend a lot of time then helping people figure out what to do next when they don't get a reply, because a lot of times you don't get a reply. So there's a lot of the fundraising game is just, you know, not getting defeated by either not hearing anything or getting a no, and keeping going and finding like another strategy.
Do you believe that there should be different messaging for different donors, or I mean, how do you target that messaging, or how do you know how to target that messaging if the messaging should be targeted?
Yeah, that's a great question also. If you know something about the donor, you can target the messaging, right? And if you don't know something, you just want to try a trial balloon, like something that I just suggested. One nuance of that is that we find that the staff at a nonprofit will already know a segment of their top donors, but that those top donors are still underperforming in terms of what they could potentially give. And that in terms of the message to when they want to engage them more closely, they need to reset the relationship. And I don't mean that the relationship was bad before. What I mean is that they have to kind of help the donor understand that we want to actually have a conversation we haven't had before. You know, it's like, every year we just send out the mail and you send back $500. We're actually doing something new now where we want to thank our donors personally and learn more about what motivates them. You have to kind of like jar them a little bit. You know, like I worked at Columbia, as I said, for 10 years. Columbia had already been around as an institution like 200 and something years when I showed up to work for them. It's like, you know, in some ways there was nothing new, and in some ways there's always something new. But many alumni had not been called by the university for years for meetings about fundraising. So I would get on the phone and say, the university is actually doing something new now. It's like, oh, okay, I'm listening.
So again, that's great, and we need to kind of reach out to these 500 donors. Let's talk about, you talked about how to decide or how to choose them in terms of they fall into one of these three categories and stuff like that. So we kind of identified, how do we know what we should be asking for, or are we not asking? Are we just providing information, and then we kind of come up with an ask later? I mean, how do we know what we should be looking for?
Yeah, so I think that's probably our next conversation, but I'll touch on it quickly here, because there's a lot of nuances. Ideally, we don't like to rush things. And what I mean by that is the hardest thing in the whole fundraising spectrum of this type of fundraising we're talking about is to get somebody to schedule that first conversation. And it's my belief that if you can get that first conversation happening, you're more than halfway there, because there's at least a level of interest in talking to you. And in that first conversation, whether it's phone, on Zoom, we're doing a lot of Zoom. People are actually asking for $100,000 and $1 million gifts on Zoom. It's kind of crazy. So not that like asking for a $1,000 gift is also fine. It doesn't have to be $1 million, but you might actually meet with somebody in person, depending on the situation. In that first conversation, you want to do a lot of listening. And the most important thing in that first conversation is to get an agreement to have a future conversation. You can ask right then for, hey, that $500 gift you made last year was great. I'm wondering if you might be willing to give $1,000 this year. And if the person says yes, home run. But what if they're one of the 50 people that you identified who could actually give $10,000? You've sort of shortchange yourself. And what we find is that if you build the relationship over a little bit of time, it's like a piece of their mind kind of opens up to like, oh, I might be interested in this.
You also start to gain a better understanding of who they are and what attracted them to your organization to begin with, so that you can then formulate your ask better.
Absolutely. And we advise like professional level listening, whatever that means. Like the fundraiser is much less of a salesperson about their organization or about fundraising, and really has to be a from the heart, genuine listener with kind of intelligent questions about what motivates you. And the worst scenario could be that after an hour of chatting, you learn that they gave this gift on a fluke and they really, really care about this other thing, and they just shared their passion about that. That'd be great. You just learned what another human being's really excited about. Not every conversation is going to be a home run.
So, you talked a little bit about, you have to ask intelligent questions, you have to listen. Who should be the person who's doing this? I mean, is this the development officer? Is this a board member? Is this the executive director? Who is it that should be initiating and having these conversations with these potential large donors?
Yeah. Ideally, in my world, it's a development director or development officer or development person, because you want that person to be really trained and understand this process really well, so then they can help the executive director and board members do it. You don't always have the luxury of having a development person in a nonprofit, so then you just got to start wherever you start. We've worked with, just as an example, a synagogue in Connecticut that they don't have any development staff. They don't even have an executive director. They're a member of the synagogue who's just super, super smart. She's raised almost $7 million on her own. I mean, she's brought the rabbi along, she's brought other, but she just understands the process after we kind of trained her up on it and supported her, and she just, boom. So got to get it done. I like development directors to start, but you can do it a lot of different ways.
And I mean, is there a time that you should be bringing your executive director or board member in, um, or no?
Yeah, no, another good question. Absolutely. Always great to bring an executive director along to share their perspective on the passion about the organization and their influence. A lot of this depends on the size and scope of the organization, and same thing with board members. Board members can increase your ability to ask more people, and they can also if they don't go on their own, they can just be an expert witness talking about why they're passionate about the organization.
Okay, so we're running low on time, but there's a couple things I want to still get into or
Sure.
dive into real quick. So you talked about the fact that you guys do major gifts and you guys do capital campaigns. One of the things that I found a lot of times is that, you have an organization who relies heavily upon fundraising, and then they go out and they do a capital campaign. They raise money from a capital campaign, but they watch their unrestricted dollar donations dip. How do you ensure that you do an effective capital campaign, but still ensure that the dollars are coming into your organization? How do you kind of market the two of them differently?
Right. So this is a really important thing to focus on. My belief is if you do the capital campaign well, you actually won't get a dip in annual giving. And at the end of the campaign, you'll actually increase annual giving. And let me just explain really quickly, is the most important thing is when you're soliciting somebody for their campaign gift, the words that are coming out of your mouth are that, I'd like you to consider a gift of $25,000 to our campaign in addition to the XYZ that you give annually, right? So you don't want their gift to be instead of, you want to make it clear when you're asking for that. And, there's some situations where it won't happen and some where it'll actually, during the campaign, increase their annual giving.
Okay, as I said, we're running low on time. Are there any pearls of wisdom you want to kind of push out here in terms of parting, gifts for the people who are, it's holiday time, so we always want to give people gifts.
Yeah, so definitely pay attention to your annual giving. It's important. And don't be shy about reaching out to the potentially most financially capable and wealthy segment of your donor list and asking for significant gifts. Don't like talk yourself down before you've asked.
I mean, so you're basically saying, I mean, sometimes people look at it and say, well, I have to have the perfect time to go ask them. Is there ever a perfect time?
There's never a perfect time. Doesn't have to be beginning and middle of the year. And the other thing is that if you actually get in front of them and you're able to ask, don't have a conversation with yourself beforehand and say, well, I was going to ask for 10, but that's going to be too much. I'll ask for 5,000, and ask for the 10 very politely and let them be the one to say, no, I'll give you 5.
Got it. So Peter, thank you very much. Appreciate the time that you spent with us.
Very welcome.
45 minutes went by so freaking quick. So thanks.
All right.
So stay tuned, everybody. Next month, we'll be releasing our 2022 nonprofit trend guide. And you can register now for the not-for-profit trends webinar that we're having on January 13th at 8:30. We'll be discussing the various trends in marketing, fundraising, operations, technology, whatever. I'd like to say that we predicted the COVID pandemic. We didn't, but we will give you some useful trends. So thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great holiday, and we'll see you in January. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, everybody.
So long, Peter. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.